first to the organizing committee and the sponsors. It's humbling to be here with all the experts here on Sauvignon Blanc. And one wine style I don't think we've mentioned so far is botrytis wine, and I was involved in making some of that for the vineyard side 20 years ago, and it's also delicious, so it just shows how adaptable it is. I do have some history of two of the clones that were mentioned by Nancy earlier in the year, or earlier today, and one of them is the 22, which is out of the South Oakville station. So I worked at Mondavi Consulting since 1982, and so I know the vines that Phil here selected on the South Station. There were, I think, 2 or 3 of them there. But it turns out in the 1950 map of the To Kalon vineyard, across this avenue, 20 feet away, was an 1890 planting of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. So I think there's a very good chance that clone 22 is actually from an 1890 planting. And in that same time, we also had a 1945 planting, and that unidentified vineyard that Nancy mentioned is To Kalon, and that's an I block, and it's very likely to be the same clone as 22, very likely. But I know when I went and visited Glenn's clonal trial a few years ago, I could pick that clone out for taste in the field. I brought it into the winemakers, and they could do the same. So it's really a unique clone, and I think it's well worth planting. I noticed it's not on either of the nursery lists that was in the bag. 22 was on there, but not 26. It's an excellent clone, and I think there is needs. We've talked about how dominant clone 1 is in the industry. I do think, as you can see with Jean-Michel Boursiquot too, there's a lot of aromatic clones that are not Muscat related. And I think as an industry, we need to look at those more closely just to be able to have more blending tools and more styles. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Daniel. Great. And I'd like to welcome Phil Freese to the podium. Phil is owner of WineGrow and Vilafonte in South Africa.
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks for everybody making it back from lunch. I mean, this is really an incredible opportunity to talk about. One of the things that I really love is to try to put things into some kind of a contextual hierarchy of how they contribute to the outcome of the wines. And we're hearing today from winemakers about winemaking. We're going to go into the clonal region here, and then from the soils presentation this morning, I think we really got deep into some of the characteristics that are imparted to the vine that then influences the resulting fruit and wine. And I oftentimes struggle because it seems like whatever you're focused on at that particular time, whether it's soil or clones or winemaking and yeast or plus minus malolactic and wood, people frequently think that's the most important thing about the wines. And so I think one of the values of a conference like this is you get samplings of all of those, and then we get an opportunity to try to then integrate into the context. Just another comment about the Clone 22. That was a fun story. I just want to give you one little extra bit of a vignette. Quite some time ago, when I was still at Mondavi, Pierre Gallet was visiting, and we were out looking at some vineyards, and we had a little bit of a variety trial that we'd put behind the winery. And we were walking through that, looking at some things, and I said, and this is a Sauvignon Blanc. And Lucy Morton was there, and she's translating, because my French is abominable. And Pierre Gallet was kind of quiet, stood there for a while, and he looked at it, and he goes, well, it may be Sauvignon Blanc, but it doesn't look familiar. And I think that was I'm not sure exactly where that came from and what the clone was. And I said, okay, well, let's go look at these old vines in the South Station. We drove across through the vineyards, got out. He walked up to the vine and he just kind of got close and he goes, there you are, that's Sauvignon Blanc. But one of the things I loved about that, once it was gone through the FPS program, is cleaned up and put into trial where you could see production, is it's a pretty much of an underperformer if you look at yield. Clusters are small, berries a little bit smaller, and total yields are somewhat lower. And now, from some standpoint, that would be a real negative, and I'm going, wow, okay, this is something we're really interested in. So it's fun that Daniel's taken that into production and that Constellation loves it. Good, thank you. I look forward to the balance of the afternoon.
Great. Thanks very much, Phil. Great, thank you. More insight, more historical insight on the origin and expression of this ancient clonal material. I'd like to welcome David Weiss. David Weiss is the owner of Bella Vista Farming here in Kelseyville, and he's a pear expert, grapevine expert too.
Not sure I agree with that. But, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My strength is in the field, not at the podium. So as I look out at some faces who are familiar and some that aren't, I am trying to remember what I came here to say. But my company is a management company, and so we're farming only in Lake County. And of the vineyards that we farm, about a third of them are Sauvignon Blanc. So it's a very important varietal to us. I was interested to know if the ratio of my Sauvignon Blanc acres to total acres is anywhere close to what it is in the county, and in fact it is. I looked at tons, not acres, but there's about 11,000 tons of Sauvignon Blanc produced last year in Lake County, and that's about 34% of the total tons grown in Lake County of all varieties. But in terms of white grapes, it's 84% of the white grapes grown here. So it's a very important varietal to us, and I think one of the things that I'd like to take credit for as a manager is that we are the reason it's doing well, but I don't think that's accurate. I think the climate and the soils and the topography that we have here are really what makes it a successful varietal. It seems almost like it happens on its own, and we do different things for different people to try to manage to their likings, but I think in general the reason it's successful is because we're here and we have the characteristics that we have here. So anyway, I won't get into any further comments, but we'll be happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dave.